I've seen NRC in the last 3 decades, and I truly believe we are at that point where we are going to be a pivotal science organization for nation building. And in every sector, what our Prime Minister is calling for today in terms of, building Canada for the future, I think NRC is ready to respond to the call to action and the research that we do and the way in which we do it, I think will bring impact in short order.
From laboccupier.com, welcome to NGBideas, a podcast about leaders in Canadian life sciences and the stories behind their journey. Hi, I'm your host, Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Dr. Lakshmi Krishnan, who is Vice President Life Sciences at the National Research Council of Canada in Ottawa, Ontario. Lakshmi grew up in Chennai, India, trained as a geneticist, and built a research career that took her from New Delhi to Edmonton and eventually to Ottawa, where she has spent the last 3 decades with the National Research Council. Now, if you're not familiar with the NRC, it is an organization that very quietly does great work that's often behind the scenes. What Lakshmi and her team do arguably impacts almost every Canadian, but I will bet the majority of us seldom, if ever, hear about the projects in which they're involved, or if we do, we're not aware of the instrumental role the National Research Council plays behind the scenes. Dr. Krishnan is one of the most senior leaders in Canada's life sciences community, and we discuss the role of the NRC, how it connects science, industry, academia, and government, what it was like to lead the organization through the COVID pandemic, and what that experience taught her about resilience, leadership, and the machinery of government. Lakshmi's journey is about curiosity and persistence, and to that end, we discuss why researchers should follow science in whatever direction it leads. Before we get to today's interview, we'd like to remind our listeners this podcast is part of the NGBI podcasts in support of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. For details, please go to nextgreatbigideas.com. This episode of NGB Ideas was recorded in February 2026. Lakshmi, welcome to NGB Ideas.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation, so let's dive in. You grew up in, is it Chennai? Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
And that's the east coast of India, which I guess is the capital of Tamil Nadu, which is the southern
tip of India. At the time I was growing up, it was not called Chennai, it was called Madras, which was the British name of the city. And subsequently we reverted back to its original name, which is Chennai. So it's a southern eastern part. It's a port city and it's a relatively large city. So in one of the major towns where actually the British first entered India through its first kind of operations in 2 cities in India. One was in the south in Chennai. And then one was in Calcutta.
I had the pleasure of visiting India quite a few years ago, and I did not get to Chennai, and I'd love to go back. And it's such a fabulous country. Could we speak about your parents for a moment, if that's okay?
Sure.
First, I hope they're still with us.
My dad passed away in 2024.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, and your mom, I read that she's an economist by training. Is that correct?
She's an economist.
And what is her name?
And school teacher. Her name is Kalyani.
And what is she like?
My mom, she's very capable, very independent. She was a school teacher before she got married. And then after she got married, she invested herself in her family, raised 2 of us kids, myself and my brother, and supported my dad a lot because Dad went to do his grad studies after I was born. So she did not go back to teaching for many years. And then 17 years after she had finished her undergrad, she decided to go and do her master's in economics.
Good for her.
She went ahead and did a bachelor's in education. Became a school teacher. So yeah, she's a very strong-willed, capable person, ever embracing learning, and also fantastic cook.
And your father, again, I'm sorry that he's passed. He was a professor and a veterinarian, correct?
Yes, veterinarian. If two things defined my father was the love of animals and the love of cricket. So my father, after his master's, was working for the Madras Veterinary College as a professor. At the time, a master's was sufficient, but then later on, I was very little, when I was about maybe 3 years old, he decided to go back and do his PhD. So he left Madras for a bit. For about 5 years, we moved to New Delhi, where my dad did his PhD at the very prestigious All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And then later on, due to various family reasons, he went back to Chennai after he finished his PhD, and then ultimately went back to his job at the veterinary college and retired as a professor of the Department of Genetics at the veterinary college.
And I'm sorry, what was his name?
Krishnan. So that's an interesting story on it. My dad's first name is Krishnan. So many people ask me, how come my last name is Krishnan? So in southern India, if you don't know, we don't have surnames. Usually,
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, we don't have surnames. So we usually take two initials in front of our name. And the first initial represents your ancestral village. And your second initial represents the first name of your dad. And that's kind of how our names are in the South. But of course, now, everywhere we need a surname. So we have started flipping the first name of our father back into our surname. Or after marriage, people will take the husband's first name as their surname. But I kept my name. So my name, Lakshmi Krishnan. Krishnan is my dad's first name.
I had not heard that. Thank you for sharing that. So I read that you spent your elementary years attending an all-girls school, Holy Angels Convent in Chennai. And I obviously have no idea what that experience would have been like. Were those years that you recall with fondness? What was that like?
Fantastic. It was a very good institution. Even though it was a Catholic convent, it was very diverse. So it had everybody from all walks of life that came to that convent. Religion was still at the back end of the convent, which is very interesting. Even though it was a convent, the convent was not focused on spreading religion. It was more focused on education. And it was a fantastic environment to embrace all kinds of learning, the English language. And in fact, to date, I'm friends with my high school classmates.
Oh, that is very cool. So you're attending this, I guess, elite girls' school. I think in the Indian education system, grade 10, well, the British education system, which is based on, grade 10 is pretty important. I guess a bunch of decisions have to be made.
Yeah.
And so do you recall what that time was like? And I guess you had to decide, okay, I want to go down this path.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a very, typical British system where when you completed your grade 10, it's kind of like O levels in Britain. When you finish your grade 10, you have to decide your academic stream going forward. And so you have to decide whether you want to do science and continue in the sciences, or you want to do other things like, commerce and economics and other stuff, which is not the typical STEM sciences, let's say physics, chemistry, and mathematics. And that was a clear-cut decision that you had to make when you entered grade 11, because the academic subjects you chose in grade 11 would be one or the other stream. So that was interesting. And so most students until the time, and wherever you study, you had less exposure to other subjects, because until the time, math and physics and chemistry was taught to you intensely. You had a very good idea whether you liked it or you didn't like it. You knew less about other things like economics or commerce or, even the arts, right? So people often would make a decision based on if they loved science, they kept the science stream. And if they didn't like science, then they just said, let's try something new. So they would try an alternate.
So did your parents have a wager on which path you were going to follow?
Not really, because I was always very immersed in science, right? My dad was a professor at the university. He was doing his grad studies when I was a little girl. So I'd been to many labs. I would go to his lab. I would, kind of be always in the realm of science. So it was just logical. I never even asked the question whether or not I should pursue science. I just said, yeah, I'm going to pursue science. Very thrilled when I used to see, when I visit my dad's lab, because I distinctly remember, I think it's grade 9, we had, school trip to the university where my dad taught. And we saw this huge, big instruments, electron microscope and, all these fancy little instruments. So I thought, wow, that's cool. If I did science, I'm going to work on these fancy instruments. So I don't know what exactly to do, but that was very cool. I was going to continue to do science because I could work with these fancy instruments.
Whatever works. So were you into sports when you were younger?
Yeah, I used to run. That was mainly what I did. I used to throw the javelin. So I used to play that. So yeah, track was kind of what I did mostly.
And how far did you go?
I can't remember. I don't think I went very far.
So it sounds like you grew up in, I guess, an upper middle class home. Was it a quote unquote, a traditional Indian household?
I guess it depends on what you define as traditional. It was traditional in the senses that, we have a typical Indian family. All our cultures, what we followed were Indian, the food we followed was Indian. But it was also less traditional in the senses that my dad was always very forward thinking. So he always encouraged us to do what we would love to do. And he gave us a lot of freedom, whether it was school trips or, doing other things. Like, for example, I think it was in grade 6 or grade 7, I was part of Scouts and Guides. So my dad sent me away for this huge jamboree, which occurred in New Delhi, which is northern India. And I live, way down in the south. And in those days, it took a 32-hour train ride to get to New Delhi because we didn't fly. Train was the mode of transport. And so the school took a group of students, and most parents were hesitant to send their children along the trip. But my dad said, go enjoy the jamboree, go. So he's very, very open to kind of, giving us experiences and getting to know the world.
That is so important. So you finished high school and decided to attend the Stella Maris Women's College in Chennai, where you completed a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology. And this is a relatively small college with, I think, about 5,000 or 6,000 students. And it's run by the Society of the Franciscan Missionaries of Mary. What was that experience like? It was similar to your elementary school?
It is
religious-based?
It's the same missionary that ran my school. So it's the same, Franciscan sisters that ran our school. So it was a very similar environment. It was one of the, the top women's institution for undergrad studies. At the time, at the University of Madras, which is a very prestigious university, undergrad studies were managed through various colleges. So Stella Maris College was one of those colleges in the top rank and top tier of colleges that offered undergrad studies.
Okay.
So it was a very, very, I would say very enriching experience at the Stella Maris in terms of, exposure that you got to the subjects, but also other extracurricular activities.
Now, I read that college was founded in 1947, which was the year India gained its independence. And I'm wondering if there was like a central vein at the college that focused on nation building, and I would assume there would be.
There was. So one of the things, and this was by design at the universities in those days, and it might have been, a legacy of post-colonial India. When you did your undergrad studies, everybody had to just also additionally do certain credits in either social service, what they call as the National Social Service Scheme, or they had to do some additional credits by being part of the National Cadet Corps, where, it was kind of a pre-military training, right? So there was no choice. Everybody who did undergrad had to have at least minimum number of credits in one or the other. So I chose the National Service Scheme, which was a lot about nation building. I did that. I mean, you had to compulsorily do it in year one, but I landed up doing it in all 3 years because I just liked the experience of going into the community, meeting different people, and, really getting into the field work that was part of that program.
Now, while you were at Stella Maris College, I understand you had a professor, an emeritus professor, who was a geneticist. And what was that person's name?
Dr. Dharmalingam. He was Dr. Dharmalingam. He was 80 years old when he was actually teaching genetics class. He had retired as the professor of genetics, actually coincidentally at the Madras Veterinary College. So he had also taught my father. And so in his retirement, he decided to also do some college teaching. And genetics was a fairly new subject in those days. So Professor Dharmalingam, he taught us genetics.
So he is perhaps responsible in no small part for the path that you eventually followed.
Absolutely. He made the study of genetics so fascinating. And his way of teaching was very non-conventional. It was very experiential because much of the teaching for all other subjects was very structured. We had a curriculum to follow, it had textbooks, and to just follow that, chapter by chapter. His course was very experiential because at the time, there was very few standard textbooks of genetics. So he taught from his knowledge, from his experience, many stories. So that made it in itself very interesting. And he was a very compelling teacher. I think that just inspired all of us to do genetics at the time.
What a great opportunity. So you graduated from college in 1987 and decided to pursue a master's degree in genetics at the
Yes,
University of Madras in Chennai. Was that a co-ed course?
it was. It was.
First, so first time you attended a co-ed course in your education career.
Yes, but it's kind of funny because the university, the program in biomedical genetics for the masters I took was a fairly new program. So they only had 8 seats for that program. So 8 students that they took into the program. And it so happened that 7 of the 8 students were actually women students. Only one boy. So we outnumbered him.
So you finished your master's degree in 1989, and I'm wondering, what was the job market like at that time? Were you thinking about getting a job, or were you thinking about pursuing a PhD immediately?
No, I was very clear cut. I wanted to do a PhD immediately. I was
Okay.
in that track right after my undergrad. I wanted to do research, so I knew I had to do a PhD to be able to do research. So I was very clear
Okay.
in my mind that that's the path I'm going to take. So I did not even explore whether there was job opportunities after masters. I was also very clear at the time in India that, if you wanted to do a PhD, which was on par with institutions abroad, particularly in fields like genetics, there were very few institutions. There were not many institutions that did research to the caliber, or were not even maybe had the infrastructure to be able to do research to the caliber that you would receive if you did your education outside India. So I was also very particular to gain admission to one of those institutions. There were maybe a handful at the time. So that's the path I pursued.
Yeah, and that institution was the National Institute for Immunology in New Delhi, which I understand is a very good school.
Absolutely. So the National Institute of Immunology was the first institution in India dedicated to immunology. And it was opened in around, 86, 87. So it was a fairly new institution. It was opened by a very dynamic professor who, again, was very passionate about bringing India to the par in terms of research and development. So he had a wide network because he himself had been educated in France and the US and so on. So he had come back to India to set up this institution. And so he leveraged his networks in the foreign institutions to get a lot of funding, to create the type of infrastructure that was on par with institutions like the Institute Pasteur. So it was indeed a fantastic institution. It was modeled like the Cold Spring Harbor, where you had labs, the residences for the professors, all on campus. Everything was on campus.
Well, and they only accepted 2 or 3 dozen PhD candidates in any given year. So getting in that program was quite an accomplishment.
Yes, absolutely. As I said, that was kind of the challenge in those days. Like the National Institute of Immunology, there were a few other institutions in India, like the Indian Institute of Science, which was much more an older institution, but nevertheless very prestigious as well. So there were 4 or 5 institutions, and all of these institutions collectively maybe took about 100 to 150 grad students. So it was very competitive, and you prepared for it throughout your master's, and you had to kind of write an entrance exam, and then there were several rounds of interviews. And then, if you were able to make it through, then you got into one of these institutions.
And that was the first time that you lived away from home, was it not?
Yes, it was. It was the first time.
What was that like? Do you remember what that time was like?
Yes, I do. I was nervous. I had never gone away from home. I got a little bit of a head start, let's say, because during that summer, after I graduated from a master's, one of the other professors who taught me in master's, Dr. Jayaraman, he had studied in New Delhi. So he encouraged us that he would get us a little bit of a summer student position for that last semester so that we could experience what it is like to be away from home. So I was kind of lucky because I got 2 months over the summer to first go to New Delhi, stay in the residence there and do my summer stint. And subsequently, when I got my grad study offer at the National Institute of Immunology, I knew a little bit of Delhi because I had already been there for 2 months prior to that, which was kind of nice.
So you were there from 1989 until 1993. And I'd like to challenge you in a minute. What was your PhD thesis about?
So the institute where I studied, it was the National Institute of Immunology, but the main focus there was reproductive immunology. The reason for that is, at the time, the population control was something that was, quite important for India and the world. And so there was a lot of work that was going on in that institute on contraceptive vaccines. So inevitably, all of the grad studies programs and grad studies projects hovered around reproductive immunology. So what I actually worked on was looking at placental factors and understanding how placental factors actually support fetal growth and allow the fetus to survive in the mother. And you would say, why would that be so interesting? Mother and fetus, isn't that what biology is about? It is. But what we forget is actually the mother is carrying a fetus which is half foreign because the fetus is both maternal and paternal, right? So actually the fetus is half foreign to the mother, but yet for 9 months she carries the fetus and nurtures the fetus. Whereas if it was any other foreign object you actually placed in a human being, you would reject it immediately, right? So there is actually a lot of modulation of the immune response that occurs during pregnancy. And part of that is modulated by factors that the placenta secretes. So my PhD focused on now we understand a lot. 30 years ago, we were just beginning to understand how immunity played a role in pregnancy.
While you were doing your PhD, you started another chapter in your life at the same time. You got married.
No, I didn't get married during my PhD. No, I met.
I'm sorry.
I met
you met your husband. Okay. Sorry, jumped the gun there.
We didn't get married until we came to Canada.
Okay. And sir, what is his name?
Subhash.
And how did you meet? Was he in the program as well?
Yeah. He was a few years ahead of me in the program, but he was in the same institution. As I said, it was a very, very small institution. You lived on residence. Geographically, like the institution was very away from the city. Now the city has grown in where the institution is, but in those days, it was like the outskirts of the city and there was not much around. So everybody stayed on campus and the people you interacted were people on campus. So many of us found our spouses on campus.
So I got to ask, who saw who first?
I think he saw me first. I don't think I paid attention to him. Like reaching out to ask him.
Now, I guess if I'm understanding correctly, you had already thought you're going to do postdoctoral work and your future husband had come to Canada beforehand?
Yeah, he finished a year and a half ahead of me because, again, he was a year and a half ahead of me in the program. So he actually moved for his postdoctoral work to Canada before I did.
Okay, so he went to University of Alberta in Edmonton. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why you came over. And so you came to the University of Alberta, and the program that you had there, what were you pursuing?
It was kind of related to my PhD thesis. So Dr. Tom Wegman, who was my postdoc supervisor, he worked in that field as well, understanding immune responses in pregnancy. And we actually had ongoing collaboration with his lab while we were doing our PhD because my PhD supervisor happened to be actually his grad student. So in a way, he was my scientific grandfather because my supervisor trained under him and then I trained under him as well. So Tom used to come to India to our lab for collaborations and we knew Tom quite well. And in fact, Tom was instrumental in convincing my husband to take a postdoctoral position at the University of Alberta prior to my coming because the University of Alberta had just hired a very eminent immunologist, Dr. Tim Mossman. And so Tom, because he knew us, he came for many years to India every year, was wanting to have the best students go to Tim's lab as Tim was starting to set up his lab in University of Alberta. So he convinced my husband to go there first. And my husband applied to many places, but then, of course, Tim's work was very, very interesting. He was also working on immunology and he was just upcoming at the time. He went there. Of course, Tom had resigned and he said to me, now that Subhash is there, you have to come. So a year and a half later, he offered me a position as well. So I was able to join.
Hi, it's Jim. When we come back, Lakshmi talks about leaving India for the first time and the shock of arriving in Edmonton in the dead of winter. Don't go away. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas, Canada's Life Sciences Leadership Podcast. Hey, it's Jim Wilson. If you're a new listener, we'd like you to know the goal of this podcast is to share the personal story of leaders in Canadian life sciences. We shine a light on who the people are behind the corporate titles and LinkedIn profiles and share some of the lessons they've learned on their journey. Before we get back to today's conversation, we have a small favor to ask. We will greatly appreciate you telling your friends about us on social, and you can use the hashtags NGBI, NGBideas, NGBI Podcast, and NGBI Summit. Oh, and one more thing. Don't forget to become a subscriber wherever you get your pods so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to our conversation. Hi, it's Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGBideas. My guest today is Lakshmi Krishnan, Vice President, Life Sciences at the National Research Council of Canada. The average annual temperature in Chennai is something like 28 degrees Celsius. And I'm wondering, you'll get to Edmonton, that first winter, was there ever a point where you thought, what am I doing here?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I dwelled too much how cold it was. And I maybe even did not understand truly how cold it could be. Yeah, okay, minus 10, minus 15, minus 17. But I didn't realize really what that meant, like how you feel that coldness in your bones and how much you have to protect yourself. I had no idea. So
Yes.
absolutely, the first winter was a shock because I thought, wow, snow's so beautiful. I can just walk on the snow. It's so wonderful. But you don't play in Alberta snow. It's really too cold for that. But more
Wow.
than the cold, I would say it was very isolating because, I came from New Delhi at the time when I left Delhi, probably 25 million population, very populous city, to Edmonton, which was maybe 600, 700,000 people. It felt very isolating. Like
That must have been a shock.
part of, so that too
Yeah.
was maybe a bit more challenging to kind of adjust to.
And at that time, there was a relatively large East Indian population in Edmonton, correct?
There must have been, but we didn't know them much at all because, we lived
Oh,
in
okay.
university campus, early days, we didn't have a car. We lived very close to campus. We walked to the lab, so we didn't know a lot about others. We knew the student population to some extent, but even then, because we were postdoc fellows, undergrad students had their undergrad student association and so on. As postdocs, you're kind of floater in labs. You don't get to see a lot of people. So we knew limited number of people. We knew a few other postdocs were there, and we made friends with many of them over time, but we didn't know a lot of East Indians, no.
You mentioned a moment ago, Dr. Wegman was a pioneering figure in reproductive immunology. He unfortunately passed away shortly after you got there, correct?
Yes. Yeah, Tom was a fantastic mentor and was such a wonderful gentleman. And I joined Tom in September, and January, he passed away. And I still distinctly remember that day because Tom was in the lab till the previous evening. I was the last one to see him leave the lab because Tom was working late and I was working late. And around 7 p.m., I said to Tom, aren't you going home? I finished my experiment. I'm going to head home. And he said, oh, that's okay. I've just come back from travel, so I need to finish a few things and I'll go a little bit later. Just make sure the lab's closed behind you and I'll leave through the back entrance of my office.
It's the last time you saw him.
That's it. And the next morning when we came up the elevator, we met our chair of our department, who was Tim Mossman. And Tim said, this really bad news. Tom had a stroke this morning. So that was a major shock.
Yeah, and he was only 53 when he passed.
Exactly. He was only 53.
And wow. So, and I'm assuming he was running a large lab and supervising a number of grad students. So his passing would have had everyone in the lab in a pretty difficult corner, wondering whether the research was going to continue or even their positions were going to remain.
Absolutely. It was a total shock because one of the things that had happened is that, Tom had, as it often happens in most, careers of most professors and scientists, there were times when Tom did not have too many grants. But then suddenly he had got a whole new slew of grants because the hypothesis at the time that he was working on about the immune system being the pivotal reason why pregnancy is successful was getting a lot of traction. And he was the one who proposed that hypothesis initially. And so he had suddenly got a lot of grants. And so he had a lot of money. So he had hired a lot of grad students, postdocs. So he was really flourishing. And he was right in that kind of, pinnacle of his career where things were working so well for him. So it was very, very shocking.
I cannot imagine how much courage it must have taken to sort through that. So the funding agency, the Medical Research Council of Canada, allowed your chairman to keep the grant going for, I think, 1 year,
Yes.
which helped everyone transition into other projects.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Exactly. So Tom was the one who had brought in our chairman, Tim Mossman. to Alberta because Tim was working in California and he was, becoming one of the eminent immunologists in this field. So Tom had wanted Tim to come back. He was a Canadian, but he had gone away to California. So Tom had brought Tim back as the chairman of the department. So Tom and Tim were great friends. And Tim also looked at Tom as his mentor. So, Tim convinced the Medical Research Council that he would take ownership of the grant for the year. And so to allow for the transition. So the MRC allowed him to do that. And so that allowed all of us to kind of continue for the year. And it was so important because most of people working in Tom's lab were foreign students. And we were all on visa, which stipulated that we could only work in this department under, this university. So it wasn't easy for us to just move away somewhere either, right? So I think that generosity of MRC and the generosity of Tim Mossman to assume leadership of the grant really helped all of us to transition. And also all of us to believe for some time that maybe Tom was just gone away for a trip so that we could just keep continuing to work.
Did that situation teach you anything about leadership that you've carried with you?
Absolutely. Now that I look back, I'm not sure I appreciated it as much then. I mean, I just did what I had to do and I continued on. But now looking back, I feel it has made me a whole lot resilient. Now when I look back, I can say, since after that, every time anything came by that was unexpected or there was a transition, I always told myself, well, I'll be okay. I can navigate this. But I think that really came from that first experience, even though at the time, perhaps I never appreciated it. And it actually feels surreal. Today, I was, talking to one of my colleagues at the NRC, because as you know, the public service is going through a very tough period at this time. And, we have to make difficult choices. And when I was talking to somebody, one of my colleagues said, I'll be okay. And I said, that's the resilience you need to go on in life. Yeah. And that's kind of what that experience taught me. And, there'll be transitions afterwards that I think I was able to navigate much more easily because of that unexpected issues that happened then.
So while you were finishing your postdoctoral fellowship, and I think it was 1996, 97, your husband at the time got that one. So I caught up.
Before I came to Canada, because when he left India, he left about a year and a half before I did. We decided to test ourselves because he was going away. So we said, well, this relationship will last. It'll last even if you leave. So
he was worth keeping.
Yeah, exactly.
He got an opportunity to join the National Research Council while you were doing your postdoc.
Yes.
And what position did he accept?
That was a research officer position at the NRC.
Okay.
He was asked to come and set up an immunology lab at the NRC.
And he, I guess, wanted you to come to Ottawa and join him. Was that a difficult situation to navigate?
No, not really. Because what had happened is that by the time I had completed my 3 years at the University of Alberta as a postdoc, I had a fellowship from the Alberta Heritage Foundation. So that was kind of coming to an end anyway. So I think I was also getting ready to look for opportunities. And we both had decided at the time that we would both look, and whoever kind of lands the first one, the second one will try to find opportunities in that city. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll both together look somewhere else. So in that transition anyway.
So January 1997, you accepted a position as research officer at the National Research Council of Canada. And that brought you to Ottawa with your husband. And what was the project all about?
So
that you were hired on for?
I actually started at the NRC at the end of 97. So my husband started in January.
Oh, okay.
And I actually joined a project at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario.
Okay.
Technology lab there, because at the time NRC there was no positions. So I was looking for opportunities in Ottawa as I was finishing off my postdoc, and then there was an opportunity that opened up at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. So I joined that position initially. A year later, I moved to the NRC.
Okay. Thank you for that. So you were in that position for about 6 years, and I'm interested to know what is a research officer? What at NRC? What is that position?
Yeah, so it's like an assistant professor, Kada, and then it's very similar to assistant, associate, and professor. So in NRC we call them all research officers, and then they have different levels. Like you start off as an assistant research officer, then you become an associate, and then you become a principal investigator. So it's a similar career trajectory as any other, academic researcher within the NRC lab, where you are working on projects, you're running a team, you could have students if you're cross-appointed with the university. So it has a similar kind of environment.
Okay. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about the NRC for a moment, and then we're going to come back to your journey. But the National Research Council of Canada, the NRC, was founded in 1916 to advise the Canadian government on scientific and industrial research during the First World War. It was initially, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was initially designed to support university-based research and improve industrial processes. And then in the 1930s, the NRC started to create its own national labs. And I think many, if not the majority of our listeners, have heard about the NRC, but they're not intimately familiar with what it does.
So the NRC initially started as an advisory council. That's why it was called the National Research Council. It started as an advisory council. And at the time, post World War II, the government wanted the advice of experts to inform Canada on the type of science that we should do in order to develop our capacity for innovation, in order to advance areas of research. So it did start as an advisory council. It was much later that actually NRC started having research infrastructure to do research. So today we have 3 granting councils: Canadian Institute of Health Research, NSERC, as well as the Social Sciences Research. So this predates at the time, even those councils did not exist. Canada's universities were primarily educational institution focusing on giving you undergrad degrees, but the research which was done in the universities was also not very well developed. So the NRC initially was created to be the science engine to spur scientific research in Canada. And then subsequently, they realized in order to be able to do that, you need infrastructure, you need research labs. So those labs were created within the walls of the NRC initially. And it was maybe a few decades later that our universities started investing in research capacity. And then we created, actually, the NRC spun out the previous version of Medical Research Council, the previous version of CHR, and NSERC. All of those granting organizations were spun out of the NRC as just granting organizations later on.
Thank you. I obviously took a look at the website, and the vision statement for the NRC, I'm going to paraphrase here, is to help Canada and the world move forward through innovation and research. And I have to admit, I wish that statement included commercialization, but that's another conversation. And the mission of the organization is to work with innovators to advance knowledge and find solutions for our social economic challenges. And it accomplishes this mission through 12 research centers. And there's 24 locations across the country. Is that correct?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. And there's, broadly speaking, 5 divisions. So there's digital technology, emerging technologies, and that includes quantum and nanotechnology, engineering, transportation and manufacturing, and of course, life sciences, which is the division you lead. And I'd like to talk numbers. Now, you mentioned again earlier that the federal government is going through, call it a rationalization process, a downsizing. So at last check, I think there were about 4,500 full-time equivalent positions within the NRC. That's in flux at the moment. And about half of those people are scientists, engineers, and technicians. And I guess there's a few hundred students and postdoctoral fellows and research associates. And I was very pleased to read that 41% of your staff are female, which is great. And I'm sure that it didn't start that way. I mentioned commercialization a moment ago because one of the key programs that you touched on is the Industrial Research Assistance Program, IRAP, and it provides financial support to small and medium-sized businesses. Who makes those decisions? Walk me through that process.
Yeah, for sure. So you're absolutely right. So NRC divisions, first of all, it's guided by a strategic plan, right? So right now we have into the second or third year of our current 5-year strategic plan. So that strategic plan is often built with a lot of consultation, both inside and outside the organization, as well as government priorities, what we require. That strategic plan, in some instances, is kind of like a living document that we also kind of have to pivot and adjust. A good example would be, while our strategic plan is, very resilient to what Canada and the government needs in the decades to come, we're also, for example, now doubling our efforts in terms of what we can do to make Canada's sovereignty strong in various sectors through science and innovation. We're doubling down on our efforts as to how we can help our defense priorities in various sectors. So there's always room within the strategic plan to align with, temporal needs of the country and the government. So that's kind of our, North Star with which we work in all our divisions. If you look at the history of NRC over 106 years, since the time that NRC started having an intramural capacity to do science and innovation, there are many instances where we have actually used science to provide solutions and provide impact and advance commercialization. So, and that is kind of the lasting legacy of the NRC. So, for example, we were the first ones to produce the meningitis C vaccine many, many years ago. The re-engineering of the canola crop is part of the research that NRC did. So there's many, many instances where we are actually doing that, and that we do through very conscious effort to keep the end goal and the impact in mind in terms of how to advance the research in cutting-edge areas, but also to make sure we are working in the right sectors, so to say. Now, how do we make decisions normally? So there are many instruments by which we make decisions, right? Currently, as of now, the budget of NRC is about $1.6 billion, of which about $600 to $700 million is directly monies that go to the Industrial Research Assistantship Program. That ebbs and flows a bit. Sometimes it's close to $1 billion even. And that money is directly supporting industry to advance their solutions to the next stage. That program is managed through industrial technology advisors that are experts in their field, but also have sector knowledge, that are embedded all over Canada in our communities and are integrated with the industrial sectors in various sectors, and are always kind of, scouting and watching as to what technologies, what companies need support in order to be able to become viable to get to the next level of support. Whether it's even to get to seed financing, you need to have, certain amount of advancement to be done. So that's kind of what our industrial technology advisors are. When it comes to the intramural work we do, we kind of use the same approach, guided by our strategic plan, guided by government priorities. We are having certain mission-oriented programs that we are launching. One of the more defined instruments that we are currently using is called the Collaborative Science and Technology Program. It's called the CSTIP. And this was a new instrument that was kind of came by after Budget 2018, where NRC declares itself that it's going to do a mission-oriented program to achieve a certain end goal. Like one example of that is 6 years ago, we said that Canada needs more affordable and accessible cell and gene therapies. So that was the challenge. How are we going to get more affordable cell and gene therapies into Canada? And the driver for that was the fact that we knew, for example, in cell therapy, new therapies were coming to market in other countries like the US, but it's costing about $1 million a dose, which was just not affordable for our healthcare system. So the big challenge that Canada faced is, how do you make these therapies available to Canadians at a cost that is reasonable for our healthcare system? And also, considering our geography, which is so widespread, how do you make it accessible? Because we all don't live just on the border of the US, we are dispersed, and not everybody has an access to a tertiary care hospital. So that was the challenge we came up with. And so in that big mission statement and the challenge, we organized ourselves to do not only intramural research, but also bring collaborators along. Because these challenge instruments then allow us to have collaborative projects where we can give grants to others in academia or industry to work with us. We can leverage funding from IRAP to work with us. So it's really ecosystem building, right? In order to go towards this, mission-oriented impact we want to have. So it's a combination of that. So there are certain areas of research we know that Canada is always going to need. For example, if you think about astronomy, one of our research centers focuses on astronomy, the Herzberg Research Center, which is, out there in Vancouver, Victoria. And that we know that as Canada, we want to be key players in the astronomical space, collaborating with all international partners. So that is a resilient kind of a forward-looking R&D, which will continue all the time. That's foundational science. But in other areas, we're going to have more targeted, mission-oriented programs. In certain other areas, we're going to maintain facilities. So, for example, we have large-scale facilities. If you look at biomanufacturing facilities, during the pandemic, we have built certain biomanufacturing facilities, which are built with the view that these are public facilities that will be available for quickly pivoting and producing bioproducts that will be needed in an emergency, which we did not have during the pandemic, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, we're going to touch on that.
Yeah. So I think it's a combination of understanding the system or consultation, and then thinking of streams of research we can do in terms of foundational science, in terms of mission-oriented science, in terms of facilities and infrastructure that we need to maintain.
Hi, it's Jim again. Don't go away. When we come back, Lakshmi and I talk about being at the NRC when the COVID pandemic hit and what it was like leading the organization through a global crisis. Stay tuned. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGB Ideas. I mentioned earlier that one of the goals of this podcast is to promote the next Great Big Ideas Summit. NGBI is an independently organized fundraising initiative in support of McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, and I'd like to take a moment to talk about the organization. MacKids is one of the top critical care pediatric hospitals in Canada, and the team there serve patients and families in need over a huge geographic area that encompasses Niagara Falls, Brantford, Hamilton, Burlington, Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, and north to Grey County. McMaster Children's Hospital serves a population of over 2 million people, and it provides world-class care. So, if you have an interest in supporting a very worthy cause, we hope you will consider supporting MacKids. For more information, please go to hamiltonhealthsciences.ca/McMaster-Children's-Hospital. Now you know our why. Let's get back to the show. Hi, it's Jim Wilson, and my guest today is Lakshmi Krishnan from the National Research Council of Canada in Ottawa, Ontario. You've shed some light on a whole bunch of things, and I'd like to touch on as many as possible. And we also mentioned earlier, the NRC is like this wonderful organization that I think awareness is not where it needs to be. And on that note, I've had conversations with academic entrepreneurs, university professors, and one who is very accomplished and a tenured professor who is a serial entrepreneur. And they tell me they don't know what the NRC actually does. And there seems to be a disconnect. And the thought that came to mind, I used to referee basketball. Forgive me, but I'm going to oversimplify this, but it feels like the NRC is trying to adjudicate private sector, public sector, like academics, entrepreneurs, and politicians. And the role of the best referees are people you never notice. Yeah. They make the calls, they stay behind the scenes. And I thought, that's what the NRC seems to be doing. You're refereeing a really intense competition for dollars and for attention. And you're doing your job so well that nobody's noticing, kind of thing. It's like, congratulations. You might want to tweak it. Fair comment?
Interesting analogy, maybe partly true, because yes, we are conveners, we are facilitators, right? We are not the ones who are wanting to take the spotlight. So that's, I think, part of the reason perhaps people don't recognize NRC's contributions and some big impacts, because we have stayed at the back while we let others take the spotlight. Nevertheless, there's a very important role we played in it. So yes, can we get better at communicating that? Absolutely. But for us, NRC has 3 enduring mandates, which was written into the NRC's constitution when the council was made. And to date, those 3 mandates kind of are, our guiding principles, right? We have a public mandate that we do what the society needs, right? We have a mandate to spur entrepreneurship and, provide the necessary, science drivers for innovation to happen. So that's there. And then we have a mandate to guide public policy and the policies that the government brings in. So at various times, we do these 3 mandates differently. And so it often is a complex organization for people to understand, because we are neither just a pure policy shop. We are neither a pure granting council that gives away all the money to industry, or we are neither just a pure intramural science play that where we do our research in foundational science, which is just enduring. So that's why I think it's difficult for the outside world to understand the complexity of NRC. But that's not a defense why we are not evident. But for us, I think the most important, the reason all of us come to the NRC, and if you ask any scientists at the NRC why they come to the NRC and they work to the NRC, it's not for, that spotlight, but it's because we are very passionate about making that difference. And we see ourselves in different projects and different impacts we have, in nation building. That's kind of what motivates most people to work at the NRC. You see, scientists are there for a very long time. 30 years, 35 years, this is norm at the NRC.
Yeah. Well, and I like it sounds like the perfect Canadian organization that does all of this great work and doesn't take accolades. So thank you for not spending money on self-promotion.
You might want to spend a little bit.
Yeah, I think it would be good. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's come back to your journey. In, I think, February 2003, you became an adjunct professor at the University of Ottawa in the Department of Biochemistry, Microbiology, and Immunology, which sounds like it was a bit of a homecoming.
It was. It was. Well, in the sense that when I joined the NRC, I was still hired for my immunology skills, right? So, because at the time when I was hired by the NRC, there were some chemists and microbiologists that were working on an interesting immunology problem, and they needed somebody with immunology subspecialty to help them. So that's what I was hired for at the NRC. So in that sense, I didn't deviate too far from immunology itself in my research career. However, I think, being part of the University of Ottawa was a homecoming from the sense of it provided me a pathway to have students and to mentor students and to have kind of an academic trajectory to the work that I did in parallel to, the more directed work that I did within the NRC.
Mm-hmm. Are you still teaching at U of O?
I am still an adjunct professor at the University of Ottawa. I don't have any grad students currently because after the pandemic, my last grad students graduated in 2020. And so I haven't taken any since the pandemic because I've been busy with more administrative duties. But I still have an adjunct appointment and I teach on occasion. Yeah.
So the following year, in April of 2004, you were appointed Senior Research Officer at NRC, and you were Principal Investigator of Vaccine Development and Reproductive Immunology Projects. And if I understand correctly, that research didn't touch on, it brought you right back to your PhD work, did it not?
It did. So the reproductive immunology one, yes, it brought me back to my PhD work of looking at pregnancy and looking at the immune response in pregnancy. So I was fortunate at the time to have retained some linkages with collaborators, very eminent professor who used to work at University of Guelph, and subsequently she moved to Queen's University. So with her and then with some researchers at University of Rochester, we were fortunate to actually write a grant to the National Institutes of Health. And we received a grant to specifically look at infections in pregnancy and understand the role of placenta in essentially managing infection during pregnancy and the role that the placenta played in protecting the fetus. So that definitely brought me back, full circle to my PhD work in terms of doing research on pregnancy. And then my other project, much more vaccine development. So I was looking at, a very novel immunomodulator that we could use to enhance vaccine response, a vaccine adjuvant.
So you're kind of riding this fine line between institutional responsibilities and academic responsibilities. And I'd like to ask likely an unfair question. In Canada, well into the 1990s and even past 2000, the term commercialization was frowned upon in every Canadian university. And there was a stigma attached to the word profit, which has thankfully changed, but it held back academic entrepreneurship for decades. Did you witness any of that academic stigma when you arrived here?
At the NRC, no, because in NRC, we were always encouraged to be much more entrepreneurial. And the rules of engagement at NRC are slightly different in the sense is that as an NRC researcher, while we are looking into translational research and we're advancing translational research, the systems are in place to support the entrepreneurial path. And it's not necessary for the researcher themselves to actually thin out or, take that path. In fact, it's very difficult. And, one can actually argue maybe that makes it quite challenging for some NRC researchers to embrace fully entrepreneurship because of that, because we don't own the intellectual property we generate, right? It's owned by the government. And so then we can't just spin away with that into a company. So we need to stay at the NRC to be able to advance it. So at the NRC, it's less evident. At the university, I am sure that the environment was very different. And if I was to think back, potentially, if I was just focusing on the work that I was doing at NRC in terms of my vaccine development, it would have been less likely to garner research grants because research grants were very much about fundamental research and advancing mechanisms and understanding the biology. And so the work I did in pregnancy and immune response was probably more suited to that realm of receiving research grants than me saying I want to make a vaccine or I want to develop a vaccine adjuvant. I think it would have been more challenging. So in some ways, I straddled those two different paths, but it kind of kept them independent.
Have you ever had occasion to pull an academic aside and say, look, you really should consider commercializing this? And they didn't get it until you, or one of your team pulled them aside and said, you're onto something here. We want to help you.
So that has changed a lot of late. So people want to commercialize, but what actually we feel is a little bit different. So many academics will say, hey, I've got a wonderful idea. I think I'm on to path of commercialization. But what they do not understand is the path to commercialization is very different from that first discovery you made in the lab. Because the type of research you need to do, the documentation you have to follow, the rigor that you have to apply, some of it is repetitive, is a totally different path from you being able to publish a very fantastic, high-impact paper with your first discovery. So I think that's kind of where I find most of the, difference in understanding between academic researchers and what, say, industry would consider suitable for commercialization, is that the difference, saying, now I'm on a different path. I may not be publishing in all of the top journals, but in order for my discovery to become commercial, I'm going to have to repeat it. I'm going to have to document it. I'm going to have to apply quality. I'm going to have multiple people do the same research in order to show, that it will work in different people's hands. That's a very, very different way of approaching a problem than the initial discovery, which is usually very, very exciting, right? So that's where
a good point.
We lose a lot of people.
In April 2010, you took on the role of group leader immunomodulation at the Institute of Biological Sciences. And Lakshmi, I don't have a science background. What does that mean? Can you dumb that down for me?
It's a very scientific word to say immune system and immunology. That's all it is.
So like perimeter convection units in commercial real estate are baseboard heaters.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a way of saying it's a subspecialty in immunology to say that we are looking at ways in which we can augment a strong immune response, right? So that's immunomodulation. So it's a very, specialized way of saying that. But fundamentally, it's the study of immunology and the study of how you can use your knowledge of the immune system to make better vaccines, better therapeutics, and so on.
Okay, thank you. So you're diving deeper into the NRC world, and I'm guessing spending more time at a desk than you are at a bench. Was that a difficult transition for you?
So right up to that point, I'd say I was still involved quite a bit in the research side of things. And by that, I mean, maybe I was not going into the lab every day to do an experiment. Nevertheless, I was still very much involved in terms of guiding the design of experiments, in the analysis of the results. And then occasionally, I was even training some of my students to do certain procedures and so on. So I think until that time, I don't think I was that far away from, what a typical trajectory may look like for, say, a professor in a university that moved from being an assistant professor by themselves with one or two students to an associate or a full professor who had 10 or 15 students doing the work, and they were just giving guidance. So it was a very similar environment.
2008, the NRC had a leadership development program where employees had an opportunity to join, I think, an 18-month cohort. And there were about 25 people that were chosen to work on leadership and challenges. And you were chosen to participate in the program. What did you learn?
Indeed. I mean, I consider myself very fortunate that I was part of that program at the NRC, because that program lasted only for about 2 or 3 cycles. I was in the second cycle, and I think there was one more cohort after me. So it didn't last for a very long time. But it was a visionary president at the time who came up with this idea that he wanted to, stimulate grassroots leadership. So the 25 people that were chosen across the NRC, none of us were in a leadership position as far as our title went, right? So we were just researchers. We were not directors. We were not, executives. That was by design, that you self-nominated, and they had a screening criteria, and then they selected 25 people. So that's how it worked. And I was very fortunate for 2 reasons. One is that, throughout my academic career, I never really dwelled on other aspects other than science. I knew how to do my science well. Right. And of course, I was managing a lab, but that came from intuition, and that came from, this should work type of thing when you supervise people. But really, throughout my academic career, there was no course on leadership, or there was no other exposure to what are the other considerations when you're actually working with people, because you're not working with a project, you're working with people. Right. So that opportunity came to me when I did this leadership program to self-reflect, understand my own leadership style, also understand what's important when you're working in an environment, in a team, and also to kind of take ownership of my own career, right? Because until the time, I just progressed linearly as opportunities came. But that leadership program allowed me to kind of self-reflect and say, hey, if I want a certain career path, then I have to own that career path and I have to work towards that career path. And that was the first time that knowledge and experience became apparent to me through that experience. And it was also the first time I met folks outside my own research institution at the NRC, because NRC, as you say, is 4,000 people. I worked nearly a decade at the NRC by then. I only knew maybe 250 people who worked in my research center.
So it was very siloed.
It was very siloed. I didn't know anybody else. I didn't even know the NRC structure. I was like the many people you say that, NRC is like an ivory castle. We don't understand what NRC is. That's would have been me too. I would have said, I know my institute, but I really don't know. I think NRC is 4,000 people. And that was
Right.
the first time I understood the structure of NRC. I had an opportunity to work with colleagues in totally different areas. And to date, some of us were very good friends and kind of peer supporters. And that was fantastic because it opened up a realm of possibilities of learning from other people's experience, learning from other areas of research, learning from our administrators, because I didn't even know what administration was at the NRC. Who made the decisions? I don't know.
Wow. So 2 years later, in 2012, there were big changes at the NRC that eventually, I guess, steered you towards your current position. And I think at that time, 26 different research institutes across the country were collapsed into cross-disciplinary portfolios, and alluding to what you just touched on. And this was obviously a traumatic change for the organization, and there might be one coming down the pipe as we speak. Do you remember what that time was like at the organization?
Yeah, I know it was a very tumultuous time. And it was a very difficult time because it happened to us very quickly. It was not something that was done with consultation. We were institutes, and I think we were, 26 separate institutes. And we were told we're going to collapse the institute structure. Your director general may or may not be one of those ones at the leadership helm because they're going to have less portfolios. And you will be told which portfolio you will be part of. So it was a very uncertain time. It was not clear to us whether we will be able to continue our research. It was not clear to us, who our colleagues may be. We didn't know where the programming dollars may come from. So it was a very difficult time for everybody. And personally for us, it was a very difficult time because at the time, my husband also worked for the NRC. And so both of us were at the NRC.
Right.
So as a family, for the first time in our entire career, we woke up to the fact that if two people are in the same organization, and if we suddenly are both out of job, it's going to have serious impact on our family. And we never have thought about that because circumstantially, it so happened we just followed each other to the same institutions, right? So that was a wake-up call. That was very difficult. Our children were very young. So it was very, very difficult to just navigate that time.
How old were your kids at the time?
I'm trying to think. My kids are now 25 and 24. So 2012, they were very, very young.
Half.
Yeah, exactly.
So June 2012, you were appointed adjuvant pillar lead for the NRC vaccine program. And I'm wondering what that role entailed. And what is an adjuvant pillar lead?
So see, the adjuvant is a name for any molecule that actually will improve vaccine responses. It's an adjuvant. So, if you look at the vaccine and what you get in a vaccine, there are many ingredients. There's antigen, which is what gives specificity as to what the vaccine is against. And there's an adjuvant, which is kind of a modulator, which augments the immune response to the antigen. So that's what the adjuvant is. Over the years that we worked at the NRC, we had developed a proprietary adjuvant. That's kind of what drew me to the NRC initially, because that's just the serendipitous discovery that they had made, that there was a molecule that was made by a very ancient bacteria, bacteria, that can actually provide augmentation of vaccine immunity. So that was what it was. Adjuvant is an essential component of vaccines. So as an adjuvant pillar, when we started this planning to launch a program for vaccine development, we had to make sure we had all of the different components of vaccines, and we were researching all the different components of vaccine. So adjuvant would be one component, and antigen pillar would be somebody looking at antigens. And then there would be one pillar for, testing and evaluation and product development. So that's how the program was structured. And because I was working on my own vaccine adjuvant, and there were other potential adjuvants as well that we wanted to work on, I was asked to lead that adjuvant pillar for the vaccine program.
Okay. So sometimes we take the next step in our career, even when we don't think we're ready. And I'm wondering, at any point in your career, and you've taken a lot of steps within the NRC, was there a point where you went home and sat down with your husband and said, I don't know that I'm ready to do this?
That would be one. That
Yeah.
would be when I took on that role and the program was being put together and our director general decided to launch the program. He called a few of us and said, well, we are now the leadership team for this program. Now we're going to put this program together. I certainly felt very uncomfortable because this was not just my research. I suddenly felt like I have to now think about a program which is going to impact so many other colleagues, because this program, if it succeeds, we will be able to bring along a lot of our colleagues and they'll all have jobs. And if we don't succeed, and it's not just my work, but all of us will have no jobs, right? So it was a very, very uncomfortable feeling.
A lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure, but also I just didn't understand what it entailed. I just didn't know what it entailed. So I don't think I specifically chose to be an adjuvant leader, but I knew I was working on adjuvant. So when I was asked to do it, they said, okay, sure, I'll do it because that's what my lab does. But I don't think I understood exactly what the role was. What do we have to do together? How do we design the program? And there were so many unknowns. How do we actually articulate this program and the rationale for it to the powers to be so that they would actually give us the money to do the work? Not very evident to me at the time because I had never done something like that.
We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, Lakshmi talks about her career and how her journey led to becoming Vice President of Life Sciences at the NRC. Stay tuned. I'm Jim Wilson, and you're listening to NGB Ideas. We'd like to remind our listeners this podcast is part of Next Great Big Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Summit. NGBI is an annual national networking event for the Canadian life sciences community, and we invite you to join us. For details on tickets and sponsorship of this year's summit, please go to nextgreatbigideas.com. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. Welcome back. I'm Jim Wilson, and I'm speaking today with Lakshmi Krishnan from the National Research Council of Canada. You're taking these steps along your journey, and I'm assuming they were circumstantial and coincidental rather than planned, and you just kept bumping up the ladder. Or was there an intentional thought in your mind that, you know what, yeah, I'd like to get to that next level?
So I think at that moment when I started being the pillar lead for the adjuvant program, perhaps I did not have a clear vision of what I wanted to do. One thing, I think through the year of during the time, I started gaining a recognition that the impact I could have would be much larger if I stepped out of my own research area, but was actually overseeing something larger and bigger. So that slowly started becoming evident. So I think at that point, slowly, without realizing, I started pivoting towards more strategic research, more programmatic research, rather than just worrying about, what my lab's going to do the next day. Right. And so I enjoyed that as it came along because I realized the impact I could have by thinking bigger and broader and articulating a narrative around it rather than just my little story.
So in February 2013, you became team lead of the immunomodulation human health therapeutics team. And 2 years after that, in April 2015, you were program leader in vaccines and immunotherapeutics. And again, you kept going up this ladder. In December 15, you became Director of Research and Development for Immunobiology at the NRC. I got that correct?
Yeah.
I hope. Okay. And you were in that position until January of 2019. And I mention that date in particular because in December of that year, 2019, the COVID pandemic reared its head in Wuhan, China, and it reached Canada on January 25th, 2020. Do you remember where you were when you heard that news?
Yes, I do. In January of 2020. So I just was appointed as the Director General of Human Health Therapeutics in 2018, but I went away to do my French training full time to get my level. So I just come back in the beginning of 2019 to assume the leadership of my research center. And in 2020, before the pandemic was declared, and we started hearing of this news about, this infection in Wuhan and maybe some travelers bringing it back. We started kind of, gathering around experts, both inside NRC and outside NRC. I was with CIHR in a few conversations thinking about what do we need to do to get ready. And at the time, WHO called for a blueprint meeting, which was in early February. It was an international meeting and they sent invites all over to any institutions, including Canada. So I represented NRC to go to that meeting. So yes, absolutely. It seems very surreal now because right in 2020 February, when we were at the Blueprint meeting at WHO and we were talking, we knew this infection was coming. But we all, even at that moment, were not prepared for that being actually the pandemic. So we were talking about we need a response, we need to do something, we all need to get together. But I remember the meeting, we didn't wear masks. We were all there. But
Really?
yeah, 2020 February, no. It didn't feel that we were in such a serious situation yet. We knew.
We didn't realize what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, we knew the cases were coming. But I think even at the scientific level, we did not have all the data points to know for sure
Yeah.
whether this would
Yeah,
be
fair enough.
scale that we imagined. Or would it be something like what happened when before that we had a SARS outbreak that were more confined to hospital cases. And then after, a few months, we kind of came out of it, right? But as soon as we came back after the Blueprint meeting, within a week, as more and more cases started coming up, we had task forces set up inside Canada. We had task forces set up inside NRC, and we were all gathering around to say, okay, what solutions do we need? What are we going to need? What's the business continuity look like? What does the infection control look like? What does the solutions look like? So within a week, we were all coalescing to organize ourselves.
So the NRC is that organization that people call on when things are going really bad. And it sort of exemplifies that you're often asked to provide the solution to like the problem of the day.
Yes.
And it's like, hey, I don't know, let's call the NRC, which is perhaps an okay segue into my next comment. When the pandemic began, it changed the world. And in the midst of that change, you were asked to take on the role of acting vice president, life sciences at the organization, NRC. And in April 2022, you were officially appointed vice president, research, life sciences. Did you see that coming?
No, not at all. So what happened in 2020, my then vice president, because when the pandemic happened and, there was all this leadership change within the government in order to support the new initiatives that had to be launched, my then vice president decided to take a JEG at the Public Health Agency of Canada to lead the vaccine procurement for Canada. So they wanted, somebody with expertise in vaccines to be helping Public Service and Procurement Canada and to work with Public Health Agency to procure vaccines for Canada. So he took that assignment and he left. And that happened within a few days, right, in 2020, in the middle of 2020. In early 2020, from March 2020 onwards till he left, which was, I think, around summer of 2020, I was already in the thick of things for the pandemic response that NRC was organizing itself for. Because we had the largest research center. I was managing the largest research center, which had expertise in infectious diseases. So obviously, I was already involved in many of those projects and what we needed to do. We were supporting many different initiatives. But when he left, my president, I remember distinctly, this was like 6:00 in the evening, he gave me a call and he said, Lakshmi, I have something to tell you. I said, so, and I thought, okay, he's going to tell me, well, you have to do this research or do that research because this company needs it. And he said to me, you're going to be the VP tomorrow. So I said, what? He said, Romans left for FAC and I just need you to be the VP from tomorrow. And I said, well, what happens to my research center? Because I didn't have anybody below me even because I had just kind of come back and was organizing my research center. So he said, I don't know, figure out what you need to do, but you're going to be the VP tomorrow. So that was intense. And to be very frank, in 2020, when I was VP acting, and I did that until the end of 2021 because my vice president came back in 2021, around late fall 2021, he came back to the NRC after his stint at the Public Health Agency of Canada. So I acted for about a year and a half. You didn't get it wrong because it was only a very few months because he came back, my vice president came back. I went back to my substantive role as director general. And then within a few months, he decided to retire or take a pre-retirement and to do something else. So it was a very, so I acted again and then I got confirmed. So it was, and all to say is that in that 1.5 years from 2020 onwards to 2021, I can't say there were certain parts of being a VP, I felt like, this is not fun. Because it was very reactive to what the ministers wanted. And it was all about briefing notes and, It was all about explaining what you're going to do next and getting approvals. It was very administrative, very tactical. And even though we were doing fantastic things in terms of what we needed to do to respond to the pandemic, part of the bureaucracy was strenuous and was tiring. And I said, oh, this is what a VP role looks like. Like you're just pushing paper all the time. This is no fun job to do. I'd rather be a director general and take care of the research, right? But I think that was just unique because of the pandemic.
I cannot imagine the stress you were under.
Yeah, it was a very stressful period. We had a phenomenal president, and he really knew how the machinery of government worked. So that helped to translate and let us know how we have to navigate this from terms of the machinery of government. But it was a very stressful period. Very stressful.
Well, it's one thing to take that position in like normal times, and completely other to do so in a pandemic. Like there's no playbook. Like I cannot imagine how you moved the team forward and got consensus on issues to say, yeah, I think this is where we should go. The pandemic was responsible for almost 7 million deaths globally and about 52,000 deaths in Canada, unfortunately. And if you could have a do-over, is there anything you would have done differently? By the way, I'm not casting a point here, but like there was so much uncertainty and people on social media going, well, how come you're not sure of this? Well, because it's never happened before. And how come you're changing the vaccine? Because the virus is mutating. And like people coming up with questions, but no answers. And then they're turning to you for answers.
So I'd say from a science perspective, what we did was remarkable globally, right?
Yeah.
From the science perspective, if you think about it, we had a vaccine in the arms of people within 12 months of that pandemic coming down, which is just remarkable. And I think, and I would say this with quite a bit of confidence, that that success did not compromise safety or efficacy of the vaccine itself. Because all that we had to do in terms of testing and evaluation was done with the same rigor that we would do for any other vaccine development or any other time. It was just done in a very accelerated fashion because everybody got together and we doubled up the effort and we did it fast and we collaborated and we found ways in which we could compress certain aspects just because more people could do it. So I think we have to be very confident to say that nothing about the efficacy or the safety of the vaccine was compromised just because we did it over 12 months. What we could have done better, I would say, is that, and then the other thing I think I would do is, and this is, every country did it differently. The other thing, it's the first time that we were actually doing something like that in the time of social media, in the time of information, where in real time, scientists were sharing information with people, right? So evidence was just arriving and then we were immediately sharing it, right? So that, but perhaps there was a lot of things that we didn't know how to manage because sometimes, in the spirit of democracy, people would say, public health officials would say, today, this is what I know. But 2 days later, that was not what you knew because now evidence has changed something else. And perhaps that was difficult for people to understand that this is how science works. When we find something, then there's a hypothesis, something, other new evidence.
You change your mind.
Then you change your mind. In real time, when we were sharing that on social media and all of the platforms, and I think I would say UK was one of the best kind of approach I'd seen where the public health officials on a daily basis were presenting stats and, curves and, infection spread rates as if they were presenting in a scientific conference, but on BBC. So that I think was challenging. But what could we have done better? I would say maybe we were less coordinated in terms of an approach. So maybe there was a lot of duplication. There was a lot of maybe inequity in how those vaccines were distributed globally. Because it's actually quite astounding to note that in Canada, probably all of us got the vaccine if we wanted to. And we all got multiple doses of the vaccine if we wanted to. In Africa, there was only 2% of the people who got the vaccines. So there was a lot of global inequity. There was also a lot of nationalism that drove the way the vaccines were distributed. And, the divide between haves and have-nots was very evident. So I would say those is something that maybe we could have definitely done better. And even within the country, from country response, we were probably very distributed in our responsibilities, right? So there was not one clear agency that is going to take the whole responsibility for the pandemic. Some things rested with the provinces, some things rested with the feds, something rested with certain institutions, something with certain other departments. And so there was a lot of chaos, and those chaos then became fodder for people to point out inefficiencies in the system. Because it is true. For
Yeah.
example, we had, some test kits that were sitting in warehouses that were never used because our, logistics of moving these test kits was not very efficient. So there was a lot of inefficiencies in the system that we could have done better if we had had a better coordinated and well-prepared system, which we did not have.
Yeah. And I think if there is a silver lining from a tragic situation, we are better prepared for the next pandemic, which is not a matter of whether it's going to happen, but when. And thank goodness that we are better prepared, because in no small part, I'm not saying this to make you feel good, because of the work you and your team and many other teams did across the country. So you're Vice President of Life Sciences at the National Research Council. That's pretty cool. And you remember the senior leadership team. That's pretty rarefied air. And I'm wondering, looking back in your career, have you ever kind of stepped back and thought about where you started and where you are?
I feel very honored, very frankly, Jim. I feel very honored for the opportunities that have come my way and for the, great mentorship I've received from so many people in formal and informal ways to bring me to where I am. In many instances throughout my career, which is probably common feeling for many women, I used to feel I'm an imposter. I remember when the Director General position for the National Research Council was posted, I didn't apply because I said, no, I can't. I'm not there, And I remember my president calling me and said, why did you not apply? I said, I don't know. Really? You think I can apply? And he said, of course, please apply. So that type of, opportunity sometimes for a senior leader to call you and ask you to do it.
They had the confidence in you that you didn't have.
I was very fortunate to have those opportunities. And the other thing I'll say is I'm also very fortunate that I have actually spent my entire career at the NRC. That's very, very unique in public service. Most of my public service colleagues would have gone to several departments before they get to my level, right? I was very fortunate that I had all of those doors open for me within one institution. And so that is a testament to the wonderful environment NRC has, where, a researcher can get transformed into kind of a public administrator. That's a testament to the wonderful colleagues that I've been fortunate to work with throughout my career and the flexibilities that these institutions have afforded me, because I continue to keep my science edge. I've been able to keep my adjunct professorship for all of this time, right? Things that drive my passion, the things that drive my interest, I was able to keep that along. So I feel very thankful and great sense of gratitude for, what I've been able to accomplish. If you ask my, 20-year-old self or 26-year-old self who came to Canada, I would not have imagined that I would be here today.
Wow. It is such a cool story. I'm looking at the clock thinking, oh my goodness, we've been I'm so enjoying this. I've got a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to cut it down to a handful. Where is the NRC today and where's it going to be in 5 years?
Great question. So where is it today? I've seen NRC in the last 3 decades, and I truly believe we are at that point where we are going to be a pivotal science organization for nation building. And in every sector, what our Prime Minister is calling for today in terms of, building Canada for the future, I think NRC is ready to respond to that call to action. And the research that we do and the way in which we do it, I think will bring impact in short order. So that's truly where I believe NRC is today. Where do we think we'll be in the future? I think we hopefully in the next 100 years won't be an institution which people won't know about. We'll be an institution people will be proud to call a Canadian institution of glory. And we hopefully will also be integrated well in every sector with the ecosystem of Canadian productivity, because that's kind of where I hope we can. Because one of the things that's very striking when you look at productivity in Canada in all sectors, we have been steadily falling down, right? In life sciences, that is very stark. If you think about what we do in terms of, our discovery research and our innovation engine, we punch very, very hard, and we are much above everybody else in terms of early innovation. But we don't see the pathway for that early innovation to actually create commercial impact. And so what I hope is that NRC is that catalyst, NRC is that convener, along with all of the other institutions in Canada, that we are able to demonstrate that, particularly in life sciences. And for me personally, in life sciences, what I'd say is that I would like to see that we are integrated with the life sciences ecosystem, whether it's biotech industry, whether it's universities or other research institutions, in a way where we are telling our story together in a seamless way. And we already are starting to see examples of that, right? So, for example, in cell therapy, we have brought the fully made in Canada cell therapy, CAR T therapy, which is against a molecule called CD22 to clinic. And that's a joint effort. It's an NRC IP that was then built upon through clinical trials from our academic institution, Ottawa, McMaster, BC Cancer. And then now there are a number of clinical partners that have come along, manufacturing sites that are coming along. That's a key demonstration where in life sciences, it will never be a story an individual organization can tell. It has to be a story where we are collaborating and we are doing it effectively and we're doing it rapidly and we are bringing impact. So I foresee that NRC is going to be right in the middle of that and be the nucleus of that type of innovation that, we all benefit to bring impact.
Yeah. I hope in the coming years, starting as soon as possible, that when there's a gathering of the senior leadership team, everybody says, well, Lakshmi, what do you want first? And everybody else can be second, third, fourth. I don't know if you're going to agree with me on this, and I obviously don't mean this to be a slight, but I think scientists do not generally lead glamorous lives. Occasionally, they get to see extraordinary things before everybody else. And I'm guessing you and your team have a ringside seat to our future. And I mention this because we end our interviews with the same question, and it is this. What is the next great big idea on your horizon?
That's a tough one because I'm so excited for what my sector will bring. And so for me, the next great big idea is going to be AI driven, but it's going to integrate ideas from all of the life sciences sectors to improve health, to improve our food and improve our healthcare system. And I look at it and say that the next great big idea will be this AI driven platform that at one end is going to help with drug discovery. At the other end is going to make our lives much easier living at homes because it will provide opportunity for virtual care. And at the other end, it's the same AI-driven platform that's going to help us make better food productivity. And integrating these various disciplines is what I think is going to create the next great big idea, not parallels, not silos.
Yeah, I've got so many other questions I'd love to ask. I've gone way over with the time that I said this was going to take. Thank you so much for this. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That was Dr. Lakshmi Krishnan, who is Vice President of Life Sciences at the National Research Council of Canada in Ottawa, Ontario. If you'd like to learn more about the work Lakshmi and her team are doing, please go to nrc.canada.ca. You can also follow the organization on social at National-Research-Council, and you can follow Lakshmi on social at Lakshmi Krishnan1. That's LAKSHMIKRISHNAN1. For information about this podcast and our other shows, please visit nextgreatbigideas.com. You can also follow us on social at NGBI Podcasts, and you can follow me on social at LabOccupier. If you'd like to find out what I do when I'm not hosting podcasts, please visit jim-wilson.ca. You can also learn about my team and what we do at laboccupier.com. This episode of NGB Ideas was researched by Xenia Pinto and edited by No Limit Marketing. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email. My address is jwilson@Leonard, that's LENNARD.com. I'm Jim Wilson, and you've been listening to NGB Ideas, Canada's Life Sciences Leadership Podcast.